Okay, it's 2 minutes after 1, and let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to MHPN's June webinar, Design That Works. My name is Xiaohanbao Smith. I will be your moderator today. Before I turn it over to our speaker, I would like to go over some Zoom items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. And the chat box will be used to share links or resources discussed during the webinar. Both the chat box and Q&A box are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see them, please wiggle your mouse and they should pop up. And if you have any technical difficulties, please also type them into the Q&A box. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We support the sustainability and economic viability of Michigan's historic places through advocacy, education, and direct action. We could not do the work we do without our members or volunteers. If you are not a member yet, please consider joining us at www.mhpn.org. If you are seeking AICP credits, you will need to log in your credits online after this event. I will send this information to the chat in a bit. And if you are seeking AIA credits, please email your name and AIA number to my email, and then I will also send my email to the chat box a little bit here. Our webinars are supported in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council and the National Endowment for the Arts. We want to say a big thank you to our sponsors. And it is my great pleasure today to introduce you our speaker, Jenna Walker. Jenna is a designer and architectural historian at Reed Walker Design Collective. And her bio is available on our website. I will send the link to the chat box. And with that, I will turn it over to Jenna.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. As was said, I'm Jenna Walker. I am the founder, designer, and architectural historian behind Reed Walker Design Collective. And throughout over 20 years of practice, historic preservation and downtown revitalization have been recurring themes. And this is really where my passion lies and where I believe some of the most consequential design is happening in our country. So when I launched my firm in 2024, I was able to really bring this passion back to life. So as both a design and preservation consultant, we support adaptive use projects. We guide historic tax credit projects, and we really focus on experiential interior design projects. We also facilitate community and stakeholder engagement. We have projects all across Michigan, from the shores of Lake Michigan over in Benton Harbor, in Manistee, to the east side in Detroit, Ann Arbor, and communities all around Southeast Michigan, as well as up in the UP. We do also have a few projects across the country in states like Texas, Florida, and Massachusetts this year. So most of you are coming here as members of the preservation community. And today, what I really want to talk about is I want to make the case that design strategy and preservation strategy are not separate paths on a project, and that they really are the same conversation. And when they happen together, they really do, from the very first walkthrough through that ribbon cutting, strengthen the project, as well as strengthening the communities that we support. So we all cannot deny that we're living, unfortunately for many of us, in a digital first world. We consume roughly the same amount of information in one day as a highly educated person would have consumed within their entire life 500 years ago. It is an absolute onslaught. Work happens on screens, shopping happens online, and our social interaction is often driven by algorithms. I'm sure we've all experienced moments where we barely look up from our phones when we're in the same room as other people. And we all get it, right? Work is immediate, shopping's transactional. Everything has become much faster and more efficient. Efficiency has increased, but so has isolation. Our historic downtown buildings offer something that digital space cannot. They cannot replicate sensory immersion or texture and light, human scale, sound. These unique and historic places provide a tangible experience that fosters connection, taps into memory, and invite people to engage together beyond their screens. The design of these places is not mere decoration. Design shapes how long someone stays, how they feel while they're there, and whether or not they want to come back. And that emotional layer really truly drives economic vitality. What people are craving now is presence and experience. So in a world where much can be done quicker and cheaper online, our downtowns and historic spaces must continue to adapt. Driven by millennial spending power and then further accelerated with Gen Z and rising with Gen Alpha currently, the experience economy represents a huge shift and reallocation of our discretionary dollars and our attention towards live events, travel, food, wellness, and community-based gathering. And thanks in part to the social media world that we live in, the visual expectations of our spaces are in demand more than ever. Places must offer novelty, participation, and belonging. They do not just offer products and transactions. We can get those online, delivered overnight. People are then choosing authenticity over generic box stores and highway corridors. They're choosing walkability over convenience and immersion over transaction. We saw this coming out of COVID when the US Surgeon General announced loneliness and isolation as a public health risk. And we know when people connect in person, they tend to linger. And when people linger and that dwell time increases, three things follow suit. Sales increase, return visits increase, and word of mouth increases. That experience is not abstract. It's measurable and it can be strategically created. And design shapes that experience significantly. Design is essentially a series of decisions. They begin at the sidewalk, but they continue through the front door. Thousands, if not millions, of decisions on every single rehab project we work on. And many of you are very familiar with the Main Street framework. And those are that is built around the four pillars of design, economic vitality, promotion, and organization. Design is not separate. It reinforces economic vitality. It supports promotion. It supports organization. Together, they're very important and they strengthen the identity of a community. But often when we talk about the design pillar, many communities are thinking primarily about their exterior facades. And facades and active storefronts matter deeply. And so do streetscapes and wayfinding and signage, but so do the interiors of these buildings. And they're often left out of the conversation. Interior design is much more than paint colors. It includes how that storefront transparency from the interior signals welcome when someone's walking by. How is lighting affecting the comfort and safety of the people within the space? How are sound and acoustics going to shape the energy or make the space comfortable or not? And what do the materials communicate? Are they communicating authenticity in place? Are the upper floors activated and helping to drive life after office hours and business hours? In preservation circles, we sometimes see design treated as something that you do downstream once compliance is already settled. But I want to challenge that framing. Design is not downstream of preservation. When they are paired together from the very beginning, compliance becomes clearer, not harder. And the result is a building that reads authentic because it stays authentic. And if a downtown is picturesque but offers no cool interior spaces to gather, no spots that spark interest, great food, coffee, it will not have the long-term impacts on visitor experience, foot traffic, or local business success. We spend over 90% of our time indoors. So we must think about how these beautiful buildings hold spaces that generate connection and belonging. So I will stand on this high horse and say, real design is not aesthetic layering. That is decorating. And decorating is related to design, and design is related to architecture, but they all have unique characters and, characteristics and work well together as a cohesive consideration. Design is looking at environmental conditioning. Space influences how people move, how they interact, how they spend, how they stay, how they return. And experience drives behavior, and behavior then drives economic impact. Design does that work. Environmental psychology studies how physical environments influence human behavior, perception, and well-being. We know that humans do not behave neutrally in space. We respond to cues. Things like lighting, layout, circulation, authenticity, spaces designed to support human connection and immersive experiences. These cues are behavioral drivers. And there are numerous models that professionally trained interior designers and many architects study in their training and throughout their career. Things like prospect and refuge theory and servicescape, territoriality, color theory, biophilic design, approach and avoidance models. We understand how these subtle cues, and sometimes not so subtle cues, influence people's behavior in space. So for an example, in retail environments, subtle environmental shifts can increase engagement, browsing time, and purchase likelihood. And in hospitality, sensory layering is more and more popular because we know that especially scent is highly connected to the idea of memory. And if you can create positive memories with those experiences people have, they're more likely to come back. In civic spaces, design can either make someone be perceived as comfortable and safe in an environment, or they may want to get in and get right out of there. So if dwell time increases, sales increase, return visits increase, and word of mouth increases, we need to think about how the spaces we design create places that people want to come back to. And people tend to return to places that make them feel something. So despite wishing that it was otherwise, we all know that a streetscape of beautiful, if not dilapidated historic buildings is not enough to guarantee a successful downtown. But the renovation or rehabilitation of a single historic building can be an incredible starting place. These historic buildings carry embedded narrative and embodied energy. Historic structures carry stories that connect communities. They enhance cultural identity, and they foster local pride. Our original materials often communicate quality and community connection with often locally sourced materials crafted by local hands. The argument for preservation, as historically has led with heritage and identity and community memory. And those are all incredibly important, but the way they are situated within the idea of a marketplace driven by experience, authenticity has really become the ultimate economic differentiator. A historic building is not going to compete on price or parking, but it is going to compete on meaning. And that is a competition it can win. These buildings are inherently often containing sustainable features. They're built with high quality materials and craftsmanship that are difficult, expensive, if not impossible to replicate today. And rehabilitation is labor intensive. Many of us in this field have been saying this for decades now, that the importance of rehabilitation is also within that local economy. When more of the work is labor driven versus material driven, more of that money stays within that local economy. And your downtown, again, will never compete with a highway corridor or for speed or convenience. And a drab interior that could be anywhere in the world isn't going to be the place that everyone wants to come and hang out at. It's authenticity that is the driving competitive advantage. So let's talk just for a couple minutes on something I hear in almost every community I've worked in. I'm sure most of you have also had your own experiences with this, but people consider often that the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation or local ordinances are perceived as a barrier. They dictate what you can and can't do. They are constraints that limit what's possible. I've heard it from building owners, contractors, other designers, local officials. But in practice, what I truly believe is that the standards are a framework for making good decisions for the integrity of that specific historic building. And they are far more flexible than most people understand. If you look at them from the very beginning as a designer, they are not the standards themselves the barrier. The barrier is late stage engagement with someone who actually understands them. If preservation design expertise enters too far down after design has already been done or drawings are being drawn, that those scope decisions have already been made. Now it's a retroactive problem solving under constraints. We're having to reverse decisions that have been made. It's going to be costly for redesigns. And, that often creates an uncomfortable situation for most people involved. When preservation expertise is brought in at the very beginning, either with the architect or designer who have that experience or with a skilled preservation expert alongside the design team, then we're designing towards the opportunity. We're making scope decisions that open funding doors rather than close them. And that shift in timing is what changes everything. So let's dig in just a bit. These slides will be available. I know there's a lot of text on this, but as we said, if local ordinances and standards are often perceived as barriers, then why does research consistently show that designation protects the long-term value of these buildings? We believe strongly that the standards were designed to elevate the quality and authenticity, not to eliminate the flexibility. That is why our firm only works on rehabilitation projects. There is a case to be made that there is a new chapter for this building, and that flexibility comes into play. We look at things like repairing instead of replacing, maintaining that storefront rhythm, differentiating the old from new so we can clearly read those different chapters of the building or the block or the downtown itself. We're going to look at integrity across all those different dimensions, location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, association. We want to understand which are strong and which have maybe been compromised over the years. And something that may be apparent from the street may be strong integrity, but often we find that there are buildings with really strong integrity that may not be quite as apparent. And the cost of uninformed alteration is real and concrete. Many of you, I'm sure, have been on projects where you've experienced this. Window replacement is the most common, conversation, and using the wrong product can then trigger that Part 3 compliance issue and eliminates your federal tax credit. And if we're talking about a decision that might cost $8,000 in the field, but now that $8,000 cost us $200,000 of tax credits, that's a big problem. And if the team is aligned from the beginning and your team has that understanding of design and preservation, you can walk that path together. And you won't have those false moves that may seem minor actually become a major problem when it eliminates a tax credit incentive. And another thing that I often see is the idea of, when people learn that if you're using a federal tax credit, you have to consider interior elements. There are not a whole lot of interior designers that understand the standards for rehabilitation. They don't all continue on their education in that field of preservation. So when we talk about existing materials, floors, walls, ceilings, ornament, detail, millwork, staircases, spatial volume, significant spaces, circulation, the overall plan arrangement, all of that must be considered and taken into consideration with the standards early on in the design to understand if this building is appropriate for the desired use. And then you can design to that understanding, and that comes out as a much better, authentic outcome than it would have been without that consideration. So historic preservation enhances long-term value. It unlocks funding opportunities, and it clarifies project feasibility, ultimately resulting, when integrated with design, to a sustainable and vital project. One of the most important skills that we find in this work is learning to read buildings before we decide what to do with them. Sometimes people have a great idea and they have a building that they have in mind, but you really need to think about them in tandem. The first thing I always suggest is to, before there's a project, before there's dollars exchanged, can you assess the building? First of all, condition and integrity are not the same. A building in poor condition may still have exceptional integrity. And a building that looks fine on the exterior may have been so thoroughly altered on the interior that the character defining features are largely gone. So it's really important to understand, what does that mean? And is that significance there or not? It's not always legible from the street. And again, that's why we believe walkthroughs really matter. We think early expertise matters. And this is why we've developed, which there'll be a download link later on, but we've developed a free assessment tool that people, whether it's a building owner or a developer or DDA or Main Street community, it's not as in-depth as like a Boom's, document. It's really looking at understanding this building, what questions should you be asking, what should you be looking at, and then recognizing when you should call in a professional before you get too far down and scope decisions are made. So I'll kind of walk you through what that guide looks like. It's separated into 6 different zones. The first is from the street, that exterior. We're looking at the storefront. Are we looking at materials and historic components? Yes. But we're also looking to see, is there signal for welcome? I know you all can think of a building right now about something that maybe doesn't feel comfortable, and you walk by it and maybe step a little bit closer to the sidewalk. And I think it's really important to think about not only what condition the building is in, but how does it feel? How is it going to make people walking by feel? So thinking about those different considerations. The second zone is the ground floor, that street level interior. Is this a space that encourages dwelling? Is it something that gives people a reason to stay? How does the lighting and the acoustics and the layout feel? Are there original features that should be considered? And, these elements matter. And that really is a consideration for not just experience, but also preservation compliance. Third, which is one of the most underutilized potentials in a lot of our historic buildings, are the upper floors. It also can be a place where costly mistakes happen because often people are considering those upper floors as secondary spaces, but many of them retain historic character and need to be considered, before anything gets too far down the line. The fourth is the idea of historic character. So this extends not just with the aesthetics of the building and the architecture and the aesthetic qualities, but sometimes a building doesn't have to be beautiful to be significant in a community. Are there not only original materials, but are there stories worth telling? Are there important components about this building or events that happened or things that tell a story within this community? Fifth, we look at community activation and experience. Is there potential that this building could become an anchor for this community or this neighborhood? Is there a spatial quality about it that could create space that develops connection and lingering? Could that activation make it a destination instead of a pass-through space or something that's limited? What would be the best use? And then lastly, we look at funding and incentive readiness. So has the building been assessed for financials? Have we considered if it qualifies, is it income producing? Does it qualify for tax credits? Has there been any communication with SHPO? Is there already a Part 1? Is it listed? Are there any specific financial incentive zones that it's located within? We want to understand those conversations early and really start to consider how to begin. So I'm not sure if that was this slide or that last slide, but wanting to talk about incentives and restrictions and kind of how these work, there may be a pop-ups that you guys can, fill out, and we can take a look at the end and talk about how how each of you have experienced some of these. But we want to talk, very, very briefly on this. I know that MHPN and SHPO and National Park Service and many other organizations have presentations that go really deep into specific programs and incentives. But I'd be remiss if I didn't spend just a couple minutes talking about the tools that we have in Michigan, because they do impact both the design and preservation alignment. And that is important to really make the project accessible. So we have our 20% federal tax credit, which many of us feel is one of the most powerful tools for income producing properties. And this is earned through compliance with that 3-part certification process that is facilitated through the SHPO and on to the National Park Service. Then we also here in Michigan do have a state historic tax credit program, though, when it's active and not limited by the cap that we're currently experiencing, it can offer an additional 25% on top of federal. I do believe that there's still some residential owner occupied credit available at the state level right now, but as most of us know, the commercial is capped and closed this year and most likely next year as well. So when you do have the ability to fully stack that incentive package, you can cover 40 to 50 cents on the dollar. And that sometimes is the difference between a project that pencils and a project that falls apart. And that's often where a design team might not understand that and know that the decisions they're making can impact financially so strongly on a project. So I want to just briefly talk about that 3-part process. We know, part 1, we're establishing that significance we've talked so much about. And then part 2, we're reviewing the proposed work, the design against these standards before construction begins. And then part 3 certifies that work meets the standards and aligns with what was approved through the part 2. So those design decisions that are made can either support or undermine the certification process. And early design and preservation alignment is not just best practice, it truly is financial protection strategy. So the limitations that we're facing on the state credit has made not only the optimization of the federal tax credit, but also the integration of other financial incentive tools even more important. And, things like new market tax credits, low-income housing credits, opportunity zones, community development block grants, brownfields, obsolete property. MEDC's got many programs, DDA tools, and there are grants that can then fill those remaining, financial gaps. But incentives only work when both preservation and design are aligned early. Many of these programs have implications on the design and the preservation approach. So we really want to understand what that looks like. And the biggest incentive related mistake I see is when design teams learn about those tax credits or incentives later, and they have to redesign because they designed not in alignment with those expectations. So that's why I believe that walkthrough, those early consultations are really great tools. Design becomes fundable, really, when it aligns with standards and strategy. So just a quick case study to share. This is a project in Manistee that we're currently working on. We're transforming a historic bank building into a boutique hospitality concept with a private developer. They have roots in Manistee, and this building actually is really meaningful to them. One of the partners' mother worked at the bank throughout her entire life, and this building just has such an incredible, important presence on the main thoroughfare of River Street. It has a vacant 3rd floor, an underutilized 2nd floor, less than half full, and then a vacant street level retail space. Really, the only space that's been continually occupied is the bank building, the bank hall itself, which is on the right side of the building. This has been actually the same bank since 1906 when the building was built. Manistee County Bank has gone through a number of mergers and acquisitions through the years and now is a PNC, but it has continuously been a bank. The rest of the building has really struggled. This program is looking to convert those upper levels into a 19 key. It was 20, but we're down to 19 room boutique hotel. And it also will have a bar and coffee shop on the main floor. And this is really meant to be a space that is rooted in place and in the history of this community. The challenges have been real. Preservation compliance, there's a financing gap, some stuff happening with MEDC that paused for a while. uncertain program. There was a lot of uncertainty at the outset of the project, but intervention was really built on early preservation alignment. Both the architect and myself, as the boutique interior designer for the hotel, both have historic preservation backgrounds. We're really looking to root the entire rehab in the narrative of the local history. The building systems are layered very discreetly to protect against the historic fabric. And the ground level space is being designed in a way to really promote lingering. We want this to be a space not only for the rising tourist population, but also for the locals who are living here year round. So on the preservation side, this means we are, retaining and repairing the original historic masonry. We are respecting the original window proportions by replacing some poorly selected replacement windows with some more accurately representative new replacement windows. The historic windows are all long gone. We are replacing the storefront system as well. We're preserving character defining spaces, including a ballroom on the third floor that is now going to be an event space for the property. And those choices were not made late in the process. We had conversations with SHPO before any design started. We had, walkthroughs of the building to understand what the historic context was, and they were baked right in from the very beginning. And because of that, this project has been able to access a significant amount of incentives, including federal tax credits, DDA facade grant, MEDC funding, Revitalization Ready, REP, CRP, and we just applied for a rural heritage grant that we're, crossing our fingers for as well. Potentially, we may even apply for the state credit in 2028 that can retroactively provide some funding back to the construction start of January of 27. So, there's just knowing that from the very beginning, we were able to design in a way that respected the historic context and aligned with those incentive programs. And the goal is not to erase time. We really want to root in this chapter, this next chapter in the history of the place. This project is really special to this community. This bank has supported the economics of Manistee since its lumber baron, mineral extraction boom in the early 1900s through today, where tourism is now the primary, economic driver of the community. So by ensuring this important landmark is carefully repurposed, the authenticity stays intact and has literally become the brand of the hotel as it comes to life. So there's going to be a pop-up here for this screen as well. I want to talk a little bit about measuring your impact. So, okay, I see the poll. So if you can talk a little bit about in your organization or community or your own building, do you track any of these metrics? And the thing is, these are metrics we're often tracking anyway. And design is not abstract. It can be measurable, and it really provides context and builds the case for continued investment in a community and in, nearby projects. When we track ground floor occupancy rates or upper floor occupancies, foot traffic, reinvestment totals. We also sometimes may look at, what are the revenue impacts of renovations? Did we see revenue boom after a renovation space or a new tenant moved in? And the thing that we think about is data, which this is so all across the board. We've got a quarter of you track foot traffic, almost half of you track ground floor occupancy, about a third of you track upper floor occupancy, and about a third of you track reinvestment totals, and about a third track before and after documentation. But then, and I'm sure a lot of you are tracking multiple of those. But then many of you, a third of the group, don't track anything. So it's really interesting to think about the combination of data that we're connecting and, what that looks like. Okay. So the reason we do this is that it's not only to have that data for our own understanding, but when you pair it with before and after imagery, this is also a really great way to not only protect the investments and tell that story, but to build trust with the community. Because often people get nervous when there's change. And if you can really show the impact that it's going to have, that's a really strong story. And it really helps align where investment has been paying off and helps continue that momentum. The other part of design, and especially in historic buildings, is the idea that inclusivity matters. And this can be challenging in our historic buildings that are grandfathered in and using the rehab code and aren't often even up to ADA standards, let alone real inclusive design. But I think it's important to note that accessibility and inclusive design is an economic strategy. When you offer various seating that can support multiple types of bodies and postures and needs, when you have universal design strategies and clear wayfinding, when more people feel comfortable, more people participate. And belonging increases dwell time, it expands your customer base. So way before we select any kind of finishes, we have to understand, what is this experience, and who is it for? Is it family centered? Is it arts driven? Is it hospitality? Is it professional? And we figure out what that clarity is, and then we start to think, how can we expand this to include as many people as possible? Because creating those story rich places that encourage connection strengthens belonging, and belonging keeps communities resilient. And the more people who feel that they belong, the wider the reach. But we have to talk about the idea that design, even despite incentives being available, and many of them covering architecture, design, pre-development fees, engineering fees, we frequently hear that the cost of design is a barrier. We frequently hear that a lot of smaller projects, they don't even think a large AEC firm will consider their project. So then it leaves owners in kind of a DIY or contractor driven build out. And that doesn't always have that impact on human experience that it could. And small businesses often assume that bringing in design expertise requires a major capital campaign or some kind of luxury. And I disagree wholeheartedly with this. I really, truly believe that actual design should be available to everyone. Good design isn't high-end furniture or expensive finishes or incredible art. It's thoughtful planning. It's great flow. It's something that feels comfortable. It's lighting and acoustics that make people feel comfortable in a space. It's ergonomic furniture that support the users. It's creating the right sight lines for clarity and safety. And it's visual storytelling that really bring a brand to life in that physical space. And for those of you in this room, many of you are likely often a connector who are the ones helping building owners understand where design fits into their project. And I think it's really important we have conversations that, full service AEC engagement isn't the only option. There are other possibilities, hourly consultations, workshop days, very scalable expertise. We have incredible firms in this state that have preservation and design expertise, but we have great individual consultants and small studios also. And there are projects of various scales and types and design teams of various scales and types to work on those projects. So even modest interventions can really impact human behavior and dwell time and perception. So, clients often wait too long to bring in expertise or don't bring in expertise at all. And I would just, again, reiterate that early conversations, even something as simple as a 90-minute paid consultation, can vastly improve and provide important insight before you're too far down the path. So an example of this is our service offering, On-Site Insight. So this is our branded service offering. Firms have all different types of offerings, but for us, this is a structured on-site design and preservation workshop. We spend 6 to 8 hours with a client. It's a significantly lower cost of entry, and we leverage our understanding of human behavior, preservation, code, space planning, performance, all of that to really provide an initial assessment and give them key considerations. We'll talk about, every project is different. And this is by no means, they're not getting any drawings. This is not a constructible set of drawings. There's no specifications. It's a starting point with high value insights. And it can give them that roadmap that they need to really understand for their specific project where to start and who you need to work with. And in a project in a historic district, it can be talking about, if the building is listed or could potentially be listed, if it's looking at using any kind of tax incentives, we can identify what historic features need to be left alone and considered in the project versus just coming in and doing whatever you want. And, this varies by project, as I said, but sometimes we're doing stakeholder engagement. Sometimes we're doing a better, more full building assessment. Other times we are sketching a conceptual floor plan and giving, they're walking away with a layout, a floor plan layout with, furniture for a cafe or something. So it really is just interesting to think that, as technology advances, we're able to more quickly provide a roadmap and analyze a project to prioritize those next steps and give people some really valuable insight at an initial consultation like this workshop. And a project example for this is in Benton Harbor. We recently completed a project, on-site insight day with the First Congregational United Church of Christ. The legacy group is looking to turn this vacant church and all the ancillary spaces into an active community center with culinary and hospitality training for at-risk youth. It'll have event and restaurant and bed and breakfast services that are part of that training program to help support the community and really reactivate this incredible historic building. So we spent the day touring the site. We analyzed the important historic features. We talked about what that could look like. We talked about the structure of nonprofits versus, for-profits and tax credits and incentive programs. We did an initial block plan for them, looking at how these different uses that they want could lay out within the project and still respect the important configuration and historic features. The client's going to walk away with a roadmap of how to move forward on this project. A project like this is really overwhelming. And by just giving them a step-by-step understanding of how a project like this works, who they need to call, what types of, professionals should be involved, it gave them a lot of clarity and is going to provide, again, a roadmap and also some visuals to share as they start to talk to funders and investors. So for all of us, when we're working with building owners and developers and communities, how do we talk to them about revitalization and preservation and design? And to me, what I like to say is that revitalization and community growth is really cumulative and coordinated, but design is a tool and it has to be there to help. It has a role to play in this work. Audit your buildings, conduct those thorough assessments of what's underutilized. Are the upper floors being used or not? Is there potential? Engage design early, engage preservation early, collaborate with professionals that understand this type of work, and align preservation with those incentives and the experiential goals from the beginning. Really talk about how the building could serve the purpose that it wants to serve within the constructs of the building that it is. To me, design clarifies feasibility and preservation opens the funding toolkit. Integrate interiors. This is something, for people at a community level, if they can expand beyond a facade program, often we've find communities have done a lot of facade programs and their exteriors of their buildings are in great shape, but they could consider integrating interiors and doing building improvement programs that expand and offer some of that build out work and updating to those buildings. Municipalities here in Michigan and beyond are already doing this and very successfully. And then lastly, measure and share the results. Those before and after pairings are really important. We are collecting them for the part 3 anyway. And when we can align data with that, we can tell that story publicly and not only improve investment, but improve community trust. So when we talk about the skills in the room, I think it's really important to just mention that team composition, because when you're working on connecting design strategy and preservation compliance, there are many different disciplines that are involved. And when communities are assembling their project teams, I would encourage them, a building owner or a community, to really not just ask if there's an architect or an engineer or a contractor. We know those are all important roles that are needed. But I would ask, is there someone at the table who understands the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation? Is there someone who represents the human experience in the interior alongside the exterior and the architecture? And is there someone who can engage with NPS and SHPO through that certification process and can help walk through what that alignment looks like? So I always, I may be a bit biased, but I always recommend a 36 CFR Part 61 qualified architectural historian or historic architect. That credential is really important on a historic project. And I'm a big supporter of NCIDQ certified interior designers if you're on any kind of space that really you're looking for spatial strategy and human experience. Interior design from a professional level is really that strong understanding of how people, objects, and architecture unite. And when we have historic architecture, often the products, the objects, and the people and how they're going to use that space are a really, really important lens to consider. We also want to think about strategy. So when you have a design strategist with preservation fluency, that is really important because it brings project management and stakeholder engagement to the table as well. So that preservation, professional, that design professional, that strategist, whether it's one person or a combination of professionals, again, we have so many incredible firms that offer these types of services that, you can reach out to through the SHPO's list and beyond. MHPN has many members in the directory. That combination is really important. They're not always the loudest person in the room, but they often are the difference between a project that fully realizes the potential and one that leaves money, meaning, or integrity on the table. So I'd highly recommend you think about that as you move into your structure of your team. So in this digital first world, obviously this is not my project. This is, $1 billion project that Quinn Evans and Ford completely changed the trajectory of preservation in our state, right? But we have to look at how incredible that preservation and design can be as a tool for economic development. If you look at what's happening in Corktown, in Mexican Town, in Detroit, based on the revitalization of buildings like this, it's such an incredible story to tell. And successful design intervention, they have activated previously underutilized spaces. They've generated local economic activity. They've created jobs. They've enhanced visitor attraction. And they ultimately strengthen our downtowns and encourage adjacent reinvestment. And our main street becomes more than a destination. It becomes somewhere where people belong. So you and I are working towards the same thing. If you're on this call, very likely, we care about buildings that matter, staying in the hands of people that love them, and being used in ways that connect the past to what comes next. And design is a tool in that work. And so is preservation. So when they're aligned from that first walkthrough all the way through that ribbon cutting, something really remarkable happens. The building tells the truth about where it's been, and it opens the door to where it's going. We're super excited to hear about all the projects that you're all working on, and we invite you to download our downtown assessment tool to assess your own buildings or use the online function. There's also an online option that you can utilize. So we have a few minutes. I think we've got about 9 minutes. We can stay a little bit after if there's any questions, or if you just have a story on how preservation and design have been really successful in your own community, I would absolutely love to hear that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna, for the very inspiring presentation. We do have quite a few questions in the Q&A, and let's go ahead and get started on that.
Okay.
First question. Okay. Does participation in the Main Street program prepare your clients to understand you better and apply this connection with downtown design?
So I think that the Main Street program helps a lot with the preservation side, but when it comes to experiential interiors and places for gathering, I don't think they're quite there. I think they actually leave interiors out of the conversation pretty much exclusively. So I think that it positions a community very well for downtown revitalization, but I do think there's still conversation to dig into really the idea that we spend 90% of our time inside and we need these cool interior spaces that people want to be in to help drive that belonging.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you still find that parking remains a classic downtown problem? What are new solutions?
So I do not do a lot of parking myself. I focus on rehabilitation of individual buildings, but yes, it's a constant battle. Parking is always a conversation. And I think that's, when I'm at Michigan Downtown Association or meeting with DDA or, any downtown folks, that tends to be a huge problem. I don't have a solution. I think that there's parking. It's just how do we add, if there's infill, can we add, infill that has some parking below and then still has usable space above? I don't think parking lots are the solution because parking lots in many, unless it's a small community and it can be kind of behind the density of the buildings, parking lots tend to break up our downtowns and reduce that density and that feeling of connection that we're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How do you assure that landscaping, natural open areas, planters, etc., get factored into the design of downtown space at the start rather than an afterthought?
So again, I would say I'm not a planner and I'm not really working on a downtown streetscape level. I'm typically working on individual buildings, but I think that I am a member of a DDA design committee, so I can speak from that role that, we're looking at it holistically from a DDA side and considering how we're adding those beautification moments in the seating and, elements to unify the downtown exterior. But in my professional world, I'm working more on the buildings individually, not the streetscape.
Thank you. Next question um, from Heather. So Heather said, like, work for a city that is trying to redevelop a historic prison that is in a dense neighborhood. But multiple market studies indicate that a multi-use development cannot support much more retail in the area. Are there design strategies that you would employ for lingering and longering in primarily residential areas?
So I think that would be a really great opportunity. I know that you said there's been some marketing, but has there been a strategic stakeholder engagement at all with the community members? Because I would ask them, what are they looking for? You don't only have, hospitality isn't the only form of lingering. It can be a hair salon, it can be a doctor's office, a dentist office, or other services that are integral to the neighborhood themselves that are still places that you're going and spending time and, still do create that sense of belonging and important. That's a really important role in a community. So it's not just the coffee shop, but it's, are there other types of services that could be provided that might be more beneficial to that community?
Okay, thank you. Next question. Um, so this is from um, one of our founding members, Janet. She said MHPN has done a number of conference sessions on downtown, upper story residential spaces. What do you feel the design contribution is of lights on downtown?
So say that last part one more time. The
Oh, so
contribution of
what's
what?
the contribution of lights on downtown?
Okay. So I think it depends on the community. Some communities can support upper story residential very well, and others actually those spaces are better as office or creative studios or other types of spaces. But I do think that it is important. A big barrier for a lot of them is accessibility. It's hard to get, elevators and accessible access to those upper story spaces. but I think that there's a market for it. If you have mixed housing, I think that that upper story housing can fill in a lot of that missing middle that we talk about. And it's affordable and it's right in the downtown. They often are smaller units. And, I think that it is an important factor, but I do think you need to consider that it within the context of each community, because some communities may not be the right fit. But for the majority of our historic downtowns, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Next
Mhm.
question. In downtown Holland, they keep people outside and enjoying downtown spaces even in the dead of winter. They do this with heated sidewalks and
Yeah,
like sidewalk
this always comes up.
heating sources and seating. What other ideas are there?
Oh, again, I'm an interior designer, not an exterior designer, but I think, when I hear about this a lot, right? We all the downtowns hear about the heated sidewalks in Holland, and I think it's just not financially feasible for a lot of communities to have that. But exterior spaces are very important. And I would argue that those exterior spaces are essentially built as rooms, right? They're just outside rooms. They're spaces that are confined and they're just not walled in, but they are spaces. And that's where pocket parks and activations work really well when you're looking from an exterior standpoint, because you need to make them at human scale. You need people to feel comfortable. When I talk about those like environmental psychology theories, like prospect and refuge is a big one. Whether you're sitting in a booth in a restaurant or you're sitting outside in an area, we as humans don't like our backs to be exposed. It's something that has come through our generations of experiences as nomads through where we are today. So you need to have people feel protected, but still be able to see the vista beyond. And so creating those spaces that are human scale and create those little pockets, like Bryant Park in New York City is an incredible example of that. If you've ever been, you feel like it's almost like you're in an interior. This park is designed in a way where there's these individual little rooms and they're recessed a little bit or they're up on the hill and they just feel like very individualized spaces. And I think that's the important part, is creating like that sense of place. So you feel like you're occupying a place and you're part of something bigger at the same time.
Mm.
But keeping us warm, I don't know. That's wear more clothes, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Next question. This participant said she loves the pocket commercial areas embedded in historic neighborhoods. For example, the popular creamery with outside seating located in the Old West Side in Ann
Ann
Arbor.
Arbor.
How does strategic design guidance help in small areas?
So this is, again, while I have some education in planning, I'm not a planner. And I think this is a big zoning concern in a lot of communities. We don't always zone for these mixed uses. It's all residential or it's commercial, right? And I agree, like Ann Arbor has a few areas. There's also I can't think of the name. There's a Jefferson Market, I think too, which is a little breakfast cafe that's embedded in a neighborhood over on the Old West Side. And it's incredible when you're there because people are just walking there from their neighborhood. And I think that it's really hard to replicate that now based on a lot of our zoning ordinances. And that's something that we have to work on from a policy standpoint to allow even infill. There aren't a lot of historic buildings like that in our historic neighborhoods, but where there are, it tends to usually be a zoning issue.
Thank you. We have one last question regarding the state historic tax credit program. I don't know if Jenna, you want to comment on that a little bit. So the question is, you mentioned the state historic tax credit program. Do you know if the state has discussed increasing the amounts on the program, as the state credits seem to get taken quickly, and sometimes just one large project will utilize the majority of those funds? And
Yes.
what?
I mean, there's legislation. I think it's still active. I know Melissa's was on the call. She would definitely know more than I do. I haven't tracked it very closely, other than, continuously asking my senators and representatives to support our historic legislation. There were competing. Some groups want to eliminate it completely. They don't see the economic value in it. Other groups want to raise that cap. So there was at least active legislation earlier this year. If it's not still active now, I believe it's not going anywhere. I don't think it's even been to committee yet. Thank you, Melissa. So MHPN is actively advocating for that expansion. There are two bills currently still out there. So there's House Bills 4503 and 4504, and they would strengthen this up to 100 million cap instead of the 5 million cap that we currently have. So MHPN supports it. I, as a preservationist, support it. I don't work with a lot of large developers. I'm working with a lot of, Michiganders who are buying buildings and trying to bring a dream together. And these tax credits literally can be the difference between their project coming to life or not. And it's really, I really wish that this could be a bipartisan supported effort and that it would go through. I think there's a lot happening politically that is keeping it from being the priority right now.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing all that, Melissa. There's great links in the chat from Melissa.
Yes, and if you would like to learn more about that, reach out to us or follow our website, and we usually provide updates in our newsletters. So, yeah, okay. I think that's all the questions we had.
Great.
And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach back out. And so this just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available in the next couple of days, and you will receive an email when it is available. And feel free to share with your friends and colleagues, and help people to hear this great presentation. And thank you, Jenna, again for your time and effort. And thank you, everybody, for staying with us today. And I just want to do a quick announcement of our next webinar, which is scheduled for July 30th at 1 p.m. And it's the Epic Stained Glass of Metropolitan Detroit. And the registration is open. And just go to our website and you can register. And thank you, and hope to see you all next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.